Hi, this is Evelyn Lopez. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear, the Earth911.com podcast for the week of June 10th, 2019. We're coming at you from the world-famous Moonyard Recording Studio in Tacoma, Washington, where we are getting ready for summer. Although, as you will soon hear, we've all admitted that maybe summer isn't quite here yet. But welcome, everyone. Mitch Ratcliffe, our Earth911 publisher. Mitch, how are you today?
I'm doing great, even though it is 52 degrees in Tacoma today.
Yeah, so you said you're actually really cold and it does not feel like summer today.
No, it doesn't.
No.
But this is the beginning of summer, so let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it. And we also have on the podcast our Earth911 writer, Sara Lozano. Sara, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm also excited for warmer weather because it's not here yet.
No. So you said it's been kind of cold and rainy in Maine.
Yeah, and some people are still running their heating systems. It's that cold.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty cold. Well, Memorial Day has just passed, and, for most of the country, that's the time when we kick off the summer season. You'll see all the summer sales and things like that. So for our listeners, what are your plans for your home, your garden, and your time off? We have some suggestions, and we have some ideas to share. First of all, let's talk about plans for home. I don't have any particular plans for my home this summer, although I keep talking about getting quotes for solar panels, which I will do sometime.
You've been talking about that for a while, but the problem is, where's the sun?
Right?
We don't, in the Northwest, have the greatest solar environment, but, we've talked about this. I'd have to cut down several trees in order to make my roof solar viable. And we wrestle with that. Losing the trees is as dear as the power that we use, since it's already primarily generated by clean energy.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sara, you had a really good article that's up on the website about cutting summer energy bills. What were some of the things that you came up with that people could do around the house to make their homes a little bit less of an energy suck during the summertime?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of things you can do, Evelyn. One of the biggest things is being mindful of hot water use. Because it's people often don't make the connection, but whenever we use hot water, that water went through the water heater. So that's consuming both water and energy. So whenever possible, using cold water, like, for example, washing clothes in cold water often works quite well and can produce less wear and tear on the clothes, actually. So that's a really easy one. Or if you're going to rinse dishes for the dishwasher, it generally really doesn't need to be with warm water because they're going to be sanitized in the dishwasher. So that's a great one. Another one is blocking out the summer sun, having window treatments, especially the east and west facing windows. It's a great way to just keep the home cooler, and especially if you use air conditioning, it helps reduce the load on the air conditioner.
Yeah, we've done window treatments over the last couple of years, and it's substantially cut the amount of time the air conditioner is on in the house, I've noticed.
And you can often, if it's sort of a in-between day where you could maybe run it or maybe not, it's some of those days then you just don't need to run it too.
Now, solar water is another option, and that actually doesn't require the same kind of direct sunlight that photovoltaic cells do. So I've looked at solar water heating for the house, and that's completely viable here in the Northwest. You can get very, very warm water, and from a relatively small installation too. Maybe $10,000 to $12,000 to completely move from traditional heating to solar water heating on a large home.
How does that work, Mitch? Where does the solar panel or whatever that picks up the solar electricity come from?
Well, it sits on a south-facing exposure, but because you can use ambient light, and the way that the solar water heaters are set up now, they're using reflectors around the actual cores that do the heating. So the sun shines through the outer layer, bounces around inside, warming up the core. And that can get up to, 300-400 degrees. And even on a day like today, where it's only 50 or 60 degrees outside, you can have ample hot water.
Interesting.
And that's another one of my annual program investments that will be coming in the future. I mean, last year was replacing all the gas appliances, and so I don't use a lawnmower that uses gas or any two-stroke engine anymore. And this year was the electric car. Solar water actually makes more sense to me than solar photovoltaic, just given where we are in the situation.
Yeah, I have really good southern exposure on my house, so I actually have an electric hot water heater, and so it works out quite well to heat the water, indirectly via the solar system. But you're right, in lower light situations, solar hot water makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I wouldn't recommend it for everybody. I mean, it's not the kind of thing you would need to put in the Southwest, right? You could generate plenty of electricity down there to do the water heating, but up here it makes sense. And we've talked with Silk Road Solar on the show before, and they're a great place to check out. So if you go to silkroadsolar.com. That's
good to know. Well, Sara, you also had some really good advice, I thought, about using fans, especially, if your afternoons are hot, but then things cool down where you are, maybe switch off the air conditioning and move to fans in the evening to kind of keep the temperature comfortable, but not using so much electricity.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a couple different tactics I've used with fans, because I'm actually not a big fan of air conditioner. But I'll put a window fan in the window, exhausting it, and then open windows in other rooms throughout the house. And so it helps draw air into the home. And that's a tactic when it's cooler outside. There's a lot of days, it depends on your climate, but especially where I live, it'll cool off considerably at night. But during the day, it can get pretty hot. Yeah. So that's a great way to draw in cooler air when there's a temperature difference. And then you can also use fans kind of directly blowing on you to make the room feel cooler. And if you use this approach, you don't want to leave the fans on when you're not in the room, especially if you are going to leave for an extended period of time, because it's just the fact that the air is actually blowing on you that makes it feel colder.
It's interesting. It's like the turning off the lights problem. A lot of people are just not accustomed to turning off the lights. You would think they would be by now, but I know I live with a couple of them. And leaving the fans on is another thing that is just an electric consumption that is serving no purpose when you're not there. So learning to turn those off or putting them on switches so you can conveniently turn them off from a wall mount would be a great way to solve that problem.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Another thing, too, that I think is great in the summer is just to line dry clothes. We have so much solar energy falling on our properties, and it's really easy to line dry clothes.
And then they smell so good, too.
The whole load of running the dryer. And then also dryers heat up your home. The dryer itself is producing heat. Same thing with some of the more inefficient light bulbs. Like if people still use incandescent or halogen light bulbs, those produce a lot of waste heat, and that's why they're so inefficient. And especially in the summer, you really don't want that waste heat. In the winter, it's more of a draw, It might not be the most efficient way to produce the heat, but the heat is nice. But in the summer, it's sort of a double waste. You're using all this energy and you have all this heat that you don't want, that you have to get rid of. So replacing inefficient light bulbs is another good tip for the summer.
Well, this next one was sort of a transition one from the home to the garden, but we have a story up on the website on easy do-it-yourself bird baths. And I know before we started to record, Mitch was talking about his backyard. And Mitch, tell us a little bit about the bird baths that you've set up back there.
Well, we have about a third of an acre behind our house, and it is populated by bird feeders. We have 6 bird feeders in the backyard. And what we've been doing is placing the old drain dishes that go under a pot. It's a collapsing swing set.
Right. Yeah. How to describe that is a little bit of a challenge, isn't it?
But there's a platform there, and so we put out 2 pie pans and we empty them each day, and we have a couple of rocks in each so that the birds don't have to wade in; they can stand and dip their toes. And we find that's very effective. And the combination of the food and the water, the fresh water, keeps our backyard full of birds all year long, in addition to a lot of squirrels. So we've got everything from a group of crows who thinks this is their house to jays, sparrows, chickadees, and hummingbirds. So it's having the place for them to drink, I think, looking at the difference between when we just had food and when we started to use the water, it makes a big difference to the population and activity in my backyard.
Mm-hmm. And Sara, in your place in Maine, do you set out bird feeders and bird baths?
My daughter just talked me into setting out a bird bath, and I've actually yet to see it be used.
Mm-hmm. Well,
there are quite a few birds in my yard, or on the property where I live. It's a 42-acre property at Belfast Co-housing, and it's been amazing watching it over the last 5 or 6 years because all the homes were built about 5 to 7 years ago, and so there was a lot of disturbance to the site. And now there's all these birds. Like hummingbirds are almost seeming like an invasive species. They're just all over the place, just kind of buzzing around. And we have bobolinks in the field that I guess have flown in from Argentina. So what I've been doing more is strategizing habitat and also having plants that produce seeds. Like often there's sections of my lawn that I don't mow, and that will go to seed, and then I'll see a lot more birds in it. So I've been taking that approach more.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Well, I think that's always helpful for the bees and the butterflies too, to have some sort of areas that are a little bit more meadowy or wild looking.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I have a peach tree in my yard, and the hummingbirds just seem to love it. I see them buzzing around it. And I have set out a hummingbird feeder with some nectar in it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe that's where all the hummingbirds we were talking about missing before the show are.
That's right.
Because it doesn't seem like there are very many hummingbirds in the Northwest this year.
Yeah, maybe they all came to Maine. There are.
Yeah, we heard about your nectar.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, we also had some good articles on non-toxic and natural pest control. So I wonder if we want to talk a little bit about that. And I'm thinking, one of the times we talked previously, and I'm pulling Doug, our producer, in, but Doug, you said you use something around your yard that's a pretty good pest repellent.
Yeah, it's tea tree oil, and if you put it on a tree, it will keep the insects from, being on the tree, hanging on the tree. The trick is not to put them on when the flowers are on, otherwise the trees won't pollinate it.
Oh, yeah, because you want the insects to come at some time.
Exactly.
And then you want them to go away.
That's right. So I think it's, and you probably should Google this and check it, but I think it's, before it flowers and then perhaps after it flowers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you spray it on, or do you paint it around the trunk to keep bugs from
No, you
going
actually
through?
spray it. I think you get it and...
Mix it with some water or something?
Dilute it a bit and spray it. Yeah,
there's a variety of things, and we've got an article on 7 non-toxic pest control alternatives that you can use, including soapy water, vinegar. These will stop trails of ants, coffee grounds, and hot pepper spray. So use red chili powder or cinnamon and mix it up and then spray it around. That'll prevent ants from invading your house or your neighbor or your yard. Another thing is you can use brewer's yeast to feed your pet, and that will prevent the need for flea collars. So there's another, don't just think about your yard, think about the animals in your yard. So take a look. There's a whole lot of different things. Oil of lemon and eucalyptus are good for mosquitoes. There's no reason for you to be bathing yourself in the toxins that you see. And how do you identify those? Look for the word caution or warning on a label. And that's almost invariably going to be primarily a petroleum-based pesticide. So try to avoid those.
I thought that was really good advice. We also have an article up on helpful tips for natural pest control. The two articles sound very similar, but they're a little bit different. But the ones for natural pest control has a wonderful chart on green pest management that breaks it out by, depending on which pest you're trying to deal with. So, for example, If you are having a problem with fleas, and in my house we have animals, so we have in the past had some flea issues. It can give you some idea of things you can do that would make it a less desirable place for fleas.
I think that makes a lot of sense to just target specific issues, because you might have an issue with fleas and then I have an issue with slugs, and there are different, possible solutions for that. For slugs, a lot of people will set out little traps with beer, or else wind up eggshells.
Mm-hmm.
And like Doug was saying, there's a lot of essential oils like lavender, lemon, peppermint that can work well too. And smell good.
Yeah, I was going to say, that sounds rather nice to have smells of peppermint and lavender sprayed around your yard.
I particularly I like a slug that smells good.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
I'd have a drunk slug if you set out a beer trap, though.
And then you challenge them to walk across the eggshells, and it's just like going to a team building.
Oh, man. It's like the Hunger Games. So I've always wondered about the beer trap. Is it that they climb into the beer and they drown in the beer, or something else going on?
Yeah, that's my understanding of it. Yeah. I think they're drawn to the scent.
Which has got to be a pretty good way to go, don't you think? If you got to go.
If you're a slug, I personally wouldn't want to crawl across the ground and drown in a cup. But, but if you're a slug, yeah, sure.
Sure. There's worse things. Sara, you also had a nice little article on how to garden on a tight space using some vertical gardening in small spaces. I like that one a lot.
Yeah, with this article, it really examines using things like teepees, arbors, fences, trellises. So basically using the vertical space more. Like my mother-in-law has this wonderful grape trellis, and then it also provides shade over their eating area. So it's basically this big trellis that covers an outside eating area, and then in the summer it's shaded, and in winter it isn't, because the leaves fall off. Other people will have fence posts or posts on their front porch that have different flowering vines or things like that growing up them. And then also for gourds or for squash, that can be a really good tactic because they can take up a lot of space. And if people are trying to really maximize food production.
And so with a raised bed, for instance, you can layer them so that there are multiple planting spaces coming out of the sides for those of you trying to envision this at home.
Yeah, exactly.
So I really like the suggestion, I'd never thought about it, of growing hops as one of those vertical gardening and shade providers because they smell interesting. It keeps your backyard probably free from some of the pests we were talking about as well, but it's a lovely plant and a lot easier to grow than people think.
What does it smell like? Is it sort of a citrusy type of a smell? It smells like hops. That's like the problem. So a little
bit
like
an IPA. It smells like an IPA.
Like an IPA. Okay, that's not a bad smell. Very good.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when planning this stuff, one thing that can be helpful is to sit down and just think about, how do I want to use my yard? Do I want shade? Maybe you already have plenty of shade, so then having a grape trellis that shades a picnic area might not be desirable, but just kind of strategizing what you want in your yard, if it's to boost food production, what your favorite crops are, and how you want to use the space. And then these solutions can kind of emerge from there.
And, we were talking earlier today during the Earth911 editorial call about the uses of alternatives to lawns. And you mentioned that you've let some of your yard go to seed and what many people describe as weeds. But, I've done the same with the back portion of the yard with nativars, and it creates more insect activity, good insect pollinator activity, and it reduces our water needs substantially. I've gone so far as to let much of my lawn go to turn to moss, which is another way of, even if you don't water it, it's still spongy, does the thing it's supposed to do, and it comes back in the winter. So you can drastically reduce the amount of water that you have to use by changing the composition of your lawn.
Absolutely. I hooked up a rain barrel too this spring, and so I haven't. Well, we've also had a really wet spring, but I haven't run the garden hose at all. Even when I've planted starts, I've just been able to dip into the rain barrels.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's the way to be thinking about this.
Yeah.
So let's move on to getting some cooking ideas for this summer.
Well, we have an interesting article up on the website about Earth-friendly summer recipes. There's just a few on there, but the one that they start out with I think is particularly interesting. It's a watermelon sorbet. Mm-hmm. That is, you cut up the watermelon, cube it up, and then freeze the watermelon. And then you blend it up with some coconut milk.
Or hemp milk.
Or
which
hemp milk.
I hadn't thought of cooking with.
Yeah. And then you could just serve it from there. You either pop it back in the freezer, pop it back into the half watermelon shell, which is going to be your serving bowl. You can either, freeze it for later or you can serve it right then. And I thought, that's a really interesting idea. No added sugar, which is nice. It's refreshing. Kids would probably love it. And it's really good for you and would be kind of a fun party thing.
Yeah, I like the cucumber bruschetta idea too, which replaces the bread with a slice of cucumber and just a lot healthier and fresher tasting. Mm-hmm. And all these recipes are up on the site.
Yeah.
You could probably substitute it for zucchini or summer squash too if you don't have cucumbers.
Yeah, a little different texture and taste, but sure, yeah, mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the fun of cooking, is seeing how different things combine.
Definitely the fun of cooking.
And that's one of the fun things that I like about gardening is I'll suddenly have a bunch of something, to use up, and it gets me to be creative. Like I've taken the spiralizer in the summer and made noodles out of zucchini, mm-hmm. and then I marinate them, just kind of soak them in a little olive oil and throw a little salt and pepper and maybe a little tomato sauce on them, and those are great. But that comes out of, sort of the panic of having 30 zucchinis and not knowing what to do with them.
Yeah, zucchinis can be tough. It's such a, hardy plant.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things I remember of reading, a couple of years ago was a suggestion. This was for both keeping the heat down in your kitchen and also keeping your energy costs down. And that is that if you are cooking in the summertime, certainly consider grilling outside if you've got that set up, but also consider using your microwave or a crock pot or an Instapot, because all of those are electrical appliances that don't use nearly the same level of energy to heat up as your oven would. So if you're cooking something that's, a pot of something or something that's going to be baked, if you can use some of your appliance cooking methods, you're actually going to be saving energy and keeping your house from heating up.
Yeah, another alternative kind of along that same way of thinking is to eat foods that aren't cooked or cold foods. Like mm-hmm. I'll make a yogurt and cucumber soup in the summer, or a tomato soup in the summer that's cold, like a gazpacho. And that's nice because if you're eating cooler foods, then you don't necessarily need the air conditioning as much. But if you're eating hot foods and, like you said, running the oven. Yeah,
warming your home.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. There's also a really clever article on do-it-yourself patio table with built-in coolers. Now, I have to say, this is not going to be a DIY project for someone who is really challenged in building things. But there are, you can follow the links to get step-by-step instructions on a nice backyard patio table that has a center part that opens up, and you can keep ice in that and keep drinks cold and other things cold. It's pretty cool looking.
Yeah, the other thing we didn't mention about when it's too hot to cook inside is using a solar oven, and that's another area where we've got several articles on the site. And these use the power of the sun to bake, to grill. They're really interesting. A lot of different options to consider. And if you've ever thought about baking with the sun, it's a lot more efficient than you would think.
Yeah, I definitely think we've got kids who are I don't know, from age 8 to 18, they would probably be fascinated with trying to figure out, putting together the solar oven and trying to figure out recipes that could be used in that. I mean, I would have just been in love with that idea.
Yeah, along that same line of thinking, some of my neighbors have a rocket stove, and they made it just from an olive oil canister and some tin cans, but they cook on that in the summer outside, and they're extremely efficient, and you just need a handful of sticks to cook with them. I've used them while camping before. It's just a really efficient way to cook, and then all the heat.
Rocket stove.
Yeah, a rocket stove. I first learned about them from the Aprovecho Institute in Oregon.
I'm going to have to look into that. That's a new one to me.
I've never heard of that either. That sounds really interesting.
They're a lot of fun to use.
I think there may be a future story on that one. That would be good.
I get the suspicion.
That would be great. Well, let's move into any travel plans we have. So there is a story up, and this one, I'll tell you, this is actually a really good story and completely, absolutely horrifying. So it is tips for toxic-free travel. And the reason I am just filled with horror over this is the comment that you should bring your own pillow with you because, of course, pillows can't be washed. So, yeah, of course, you're in your hotel. They may be washing the pillowcases, but, oh, man, this article says, the pillows themselves, I'll just read this to you. It's so terrible. It's so gross. It says, hotel pillows and mattresses are rife with dead skin cells, fungi, bacteria, and dust mites. It says, sure, the pillowcases are washed, but that doesn't remove the 4 to 16 different kinds of fungi found in the average pillow. Okay, so I'm done, right? Well, I don't know if I'm ever going to travel again.
Bed bugs too.
Oh, man. So definitely I'm going to be looking into travel pillows, those little inflatable pillows, because now I'm not going to be able to sleep on a hotel pillow.
Well, I think the other thing is the consistent need for sanitizer when you're traveling, because you're touching so many different surfaces where other people from other parts of the world that have been exposed to things you may never have touched. And I see this because I travel a lot. I get sick all the time because I'm exposed to novel pathogens.
That's just...
and so using hand sanitizer, wearing a mask on the plane. But there's another thing to consider here when we talk about safe travel, and that is this safe for the planet? And this is, I think this is going to be a rising topic of conversation over the next couple of years. Look, an airline flight is incredibly carbon intensive. Mm-hmm. And a lot of folks now want to go see things before they vanish, but that's contributing to the things vanishing because we're increasing the climate temperature. We're taking things out of nature that shouldn't be as souvenirs. And we've written numbers of articles about how to avoid being a bad visitor by avoiding taking souvenirs. But just the decision to go is one that has a lot of implications for the environment and atmosphere. And so I've really been rethinking when and why I travel. Sometimes it has to happen because of business, but even that I'd like to virtualize so that I don't have to get on a plane and contribute tons of CO2 to the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And another thing, too, if you do have to go taking a direct flight, like instead of having 2 one-way tickets to fly in a triangle, then at least you eliminated one flight.
Mm-hmm.
There's some things to do, like if you decide that you do need to travel to kind of cut down on the emissions.
Sure, takeoff and landings are going to be more fuel intensive because you're speeding the plane up and slowing the plane down.
Exactly. And sometimes the flight, if you take indirect flights, sometimes you might fly from Seattle to Texas to get to New York or something.
Right.
No sane person should do that, but unfortunately that is the offer we get from the airlines.
Yeah. Well, what about Mitch, you have any summer travel plans?
Well, I'm going to go to the ISRI Northwest Conference in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Wow.
Because Coeur d'Alene is a destination city.
Yeah.
No, my travel plans are around wintertime and going to meet our future in-laws.
Oh, that would be exciting.
Yes, won't it? Mm-hmm. I'll be vacationing on the North Sea in early January.
Oh dear, I'm sorry, but
it's great. It's like living in the Northwest.
That sounds cold. Yeah. What about you? What about you, Sara? Any family travel plans this summer?
I'm planning to stick pretty close to home and do some camping.
Oh, that sounds nice.
Maine in the summer is just phenomenal. So I want to enjoy every minute of it.
And there's so much to do in your local community that you often don't pay attention to because you're told that travel is better than localism. And that may be a thing to rethink as well. I think exploring all the opportunities for volunteerism, for hanging out with your friends are really important. And it's time maybe to look up from our screens and look at each other.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really like to take trips during the summertime because similarly, Washington State, I mean, if in the summertime here, there's hard to find any place that's more beautiful. So I prefer to travel when it's in February. I'll want to go someplace warm, but in summertime I'll have to stay home. Well, you guys ready for Earthling questions?
Always.
Okay.
Always.
So our first one comes from Deborah on Facebook, and she says, I have a box of gift cards to recycle. How do I go about it?
Well, gift cards, and so we're assuming that doesn't mean an old-fashioned card that you send with a gift, but the cards that contain a stored value, like a credit card that you give to somebody else. So that's a new category of recyclable, and one that if you ever have been to a grocery store, you can see how many different cards there are out there. Gift cards are made of polyvinyl chloride or PVC. That's a very familiar type of plastic. It's incredibly recyclable, and unfortunately, PVC isn't recycled or accepted by most municipal recycling programs. So you do have to find a specialized recycler for gift cards. And there are a number of options there. TerraCycle has a mail-in box that you can buy. You load it up with the cards and then send it in when it's full, and they'll recycle them responsibly. But you also should look at reuse ideas. And we have some articles on the site that talk about creating art with cards, but you also can reload these cards with value. Most retailers that offer them now will also recharge them. So if you use a card that you receive as a gift, you can recharge it and give it to somebody else so that they can use it. And that's a way of reducing the need to recycle and the plastic waste that you're producing in the first place. So lots of opportunities, but unfortunately, you can't just drop them in your curbside bin. Yeah. You'll need to take them into the transfer station, or you'll need to get them in a mailing program like TerraCycles.
Yeah, and I would add to that, be very careful about not dropping them in with your paper recycling, because you can contaminate an entire load of paper with these plastic cards. So,
and there are other cards which are not fully plastic, that are plastic and paper, that are out there that you may think could be recycled because they have paper fiber in them, and they should not be added to that recycling either. Yeah.
So Blake in Alpine, Utah has a bit of a horror story. He comes to us on Facebook and he says, I have a 55-gallon barrel of oil at my house that a previous homeowner left. How can I get someone to come and haul it away?
Well, so we had a dialogue with Blake about this, because this is the kind of problem that a lot of people have, and there are no simple answers for. So you can take something like that to a household hazardous waste drop-off site because it is in your house. But it always has to be handled by a hazardous waste facility. And in a large quantity, like 55 gallons.
Yeah, I mean, that must weigh so much.
Yeah, right. And so somebody's going to have to take that for you, and that'll be a hauler locally. And so Blake couldn't find a local hauler that would take the barrel to the Transjordan landfill household hazardous waste drop-off site, which is out across the valley from Salt Lake City. And so what I would suggest is, with something like this, find a hauler who will agree to take it to the recycling facility and show you some proof they did it. Don't just let somebody haul something away like that, because they're incented because it costs them money to handle it well, to not handle it well. So it's important to work with a hauler who can take that kind of volume away. Now, would somebody make you pay to do that? Well, the oil is worth money, and the steel in the barrel is worth money. And so it's possible that a specialized recycler would be interested in that, or a hauler who will sell the materials, the oil separate from the barrel, to a specialized recycler. So you may not have to pay for that hauling. And that's something to take into account when you think about a 55-gallon barrel of oil in your backyard.
Yeah. Man, I would not want to deal with that. But that's really good advice on how to. Well, finally, Kim in New Lenox, Illinois asks, she says, I have coaxial cables, plugs, and other old wires. I viewed your site, but wires and cords were not listed as an option. Any idea where I can bring them? I have a laundry basket full.
Well, I have a laundry basket full of those kinds of cables and plugs and wires, too.
Yeah, just in case, right? Just in case you might need them again.
And so I can find the old power supplies.
Uh-huh.
That's the rationale for why they're still around. But a lot of so what this is e-waste. Coaxial cable is the cable you connect a TV to the wall with, or a computer cable, which might be a PCI cable, or there's a whole bunch of them. A SCSI cable from the old days. These can all be recycled by an e-waste recycler, and there's a couple of different options. First, most electronic stores, the major electronic stores, are collecting this type of material now. Particularly Best Buy and Staples will accept old coaxial and computer cables, and you can just walk in and hand them that. The other thing to do is consider reuse for these kinds of cables. Now, you want to make sure you're using safe materials, that there's not lead or some sort of insulation that's toxic, but you can cut an old electric cable or an old coaxial cable to, for instance, work in the garden to restrain a tree or to shape a tree. It's also possible with many of these cables to put a new end on them and just cut out the part that no longer works. So if you've got an electric cable, you can have a plug added to it and then continue to use the cable. So don't necessarily think you have to throw all these things away, but if you do want to, I would take them to Best Buy or Staples. Yeah,
that's good advice.
And if you don't have one of those locally, then the local e-waste program, which may be a permanent year-round offering from your municipality, or they might have a once-a-year or twice-a-year e-waste collection day, and you want to look for those.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mitch, did you want to give a quick mention to some of the recent interviews that are up on the website since we last talked?
Yeah, we're having a lot of interesting conversations with people, and there's going to be there's one out as of Friday about safety in the recycling industry. We talked with the Vice President of Safety, Scott Wiggins, at ISRI, the Institute for Scrap Recycling Industries, and that went up on Friday, just last Friday, and the reason is there's a industry-wide safety stand-down day coming up, and the EPA requires that recyclers get together and talk safety. So we wanted to talk about how to recycle safely so that people don't get hurt by the materials you put in the system. So that's one that came out Friday. Last Monday, Dan Lamb, the president of the Arbor Day Foundation, talked to us about their Time for Trees initiative. And what they're trying to do is get 100 million trees planted and 5 million people to get out and start tree planting as a contribution to reducing CO2 in the atmosphere. Arbor Day, Earth Day has taken a lot of the attention from Arbor Day because they are very similarly, or they're in the same calendar week in many cases. But it's usually the last Friday of April. But now they're doing this year round. And one of the things I learned from this conversation is that they have a wonderful tree store with incredible recommendation capabilities for picking the right tree for your soil in your area. Wow. And the trees are incredibly inexpensive. So the Arbor Day Foundation, to me, suddenly became a much bigger part of some of my gardening plans.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. That's really good to know.
And then finally, we talked with Sonia Norman, who is Director of Sustainability at Salesforce. And Salesforce is a customer relationship management software company, and essentially really good, really advanced contact database software. Mm-hmm. And they've grown from nothing when they started in 2000 to a multi-billion-dollar company. They have one of the largest real estate developments in San Francisco. The new tallest buildings in San Francisco come from Salesforce, and they are already working to make those buildings carbon neutral. Their founder, Mark Benioff, made this a priority when he started the company. They're working towards eliminating carbon throughout their business. They eliminated carbon emissions in their cloud hosting services. So when you use the software, you just use a cloud service. You don't actually download any software.
Nice.
That's all running on renewable energy now, and they're going for full carbon neutrality across the entire company by 2023. And right now, they're offsetting their remaining emissions by purchasing carbon credits, which are retired at the end of the year. So essentially, they're putting back as much carbon as they are still producing. So really inspiring conversation and very practical in terms of thinking about how to make progress as a business. They did this in 2000. They got rid of their greenhouse gas emissions in 2017. We all can learn from that.
Yeah, I thought that was very impressive. I had not actually been familiar with Salesforce before this interview, but the things that they've done and the fact that they really integrate all of their employees into this decision-making and setting their goals, I was very impressed by that.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast to, Amazon had 10 or 12,000 employees try to confront Jeff Bezos, the CEO, at their corporate meeting, and he refused to talk to them about climate change. That kind of leadership is troubling, and it's really inspiring to see somebody who is living those values in a company like Salesforce.
Absolutely. Well, anything else before we wrap up, Mitch?
No, we're going to be launching. Those of you who use our iRecycle app, we're going to have a new version of that out in the next few weeks, both for iOS and for Android. It'll do all the same things that the old version used to do, but it's cleaner, faster, and we're going to be adding other capabilities to it once we get the new version out.
Excellent. Well, that's it for this episode. We are always interested in your questions and suggestions. You can send us an email, feedback@earth911.com. Stay tuned on all of your normal podcast platforms, and we will see you next time.
I'm going to go find out what a rocket stove is.
Definitely.
There you go.
All right. Talk to you guys later.
Thanks, everybody.